So we're here at Evolution Martial Arts in Sparks, Nevada. I'm Ben Brown, one of the teachers here. I also own Scene Safe 911, which is a company that provides self-defense, situational awareness training for first responders. And I got Brad, my friend here, who we work together a lot. We're just going to talk today about kind of the fundamentals of hand fighting, which is stand-up grappling. Some things to think about. A lot of times people don't know what the objectives are, what they're trying to accomplish when they're standing up. And so I'm just going to talk about a couple of fundamental concepts, things to think about, and ways to accomplish those. First of all, if you're a grappler, if you do jiu-jitsu, then you've probably been exposed to the idea of a guard. The guard is when you're on the ground. I'll go ahead and sit down real quick. The guard is, I'm sitting, and whether Brad is standing or you can be on your knees, my guard is protecting me. Primarily, I'm using my feet to keep distance between Brad and my hands as well. If I get pushed down onto my back, it's a lot of my feet, right? And then my hands are like secondary defense. I'm trying to keep Brad away from my hips and my head. Well, it's the same thing when we're on our feet. My hands are my guard. So think of stand-up grappling the same way you do when you're on the ground. It's just we have more mobility, but it's also harder to pass the guard standing because that other person has so much mobility. So it's sort of a trade-off. When we're hand fighting, our three objectives are hand control, which is basically arm control. And usually it's through the wrists. We're not necessarily gonna hold someone's hand like this, but we're gonna control their wrists. And usually it's gonna be with some combination of two hands. It's a 2-on-1 is what we call it. It can be literally two hands on the wrist. It can be one hand on the wrist, one on the elbow, one under the armpit, right? I can have a wrist, and then the other thing that we want is head control. So I'm controlling Brad's head. We call this a collar tie. If you're wearing a gi or even like street clothes, a jacket, sweatshirt, something heavy, you can hold on to that and you're controlling their head through that grip. If it's the head, we want to occupy the space between the shoulder and his ear, which is part of the inside space, and that's the third thing we want. So this is kind of a combo. I'm controlling his head, but I do that through getting control of this inside space. Now, there's a big difference between this, where there's all this space here, and this, where I close that space and I'm connected to Brad. If I have this and something on the other side, I can move him now, forward, backward, to the side. But if I'm not connected on my forearm here, there's a lot of slack here, meaning I start to generate energy and it's not affecting Brad. I'm losing energy. So I want closer to 100% efficiency. Now all the energy I generate moves Brad. So wrist control, which controls their arm, head control. What am I trying to do with head control? I'm trying to break Brad's posture, usually, okay? Meaning I want his head out in front of his hips. Broken posture leads to cool things like chokes and other stuff like that. Or I threaten that and then he pulls back and it exposes his lower body, single legs, body locks, all those cool things. The other thing that I'm trying to accomplish is I want to occupy, so I always say infiltrate, occupy, dominate his inside space. Predominantly elbow to hip. This space right here to his hip, all this. I want to insert parts of me, usually my arm, into that space. I want to get as connected to him as possible so that I can move him around and turn it into things like takedowns. Okay, so a really good example of that would be, let's say Brad reaches for me lazily and he's exposed all this space. And I take that space and I connect myself, I connect my head, I connect my hips. I'm headed toward a really good body lock here, which is going to be the next video. I connect my hands. Instead of having them up higher where Brad can free his hips, okay, go back. I actually block his hips. I've got to see, you can already see what's happening here. This is starting to go really bad for Brad, okay? But all that happened because I was able to infiltrate, occupy, and dominate his inside space. And like I said, for standing up, there's two types of inside space. ear to shoulder, elbow to hip. And we want to get really good at dominating that space. So what's going to happen here is Brad and I are going to hand fight, very flowy, very non-competitive, and we're going to challenge each other and jockey for those positions. We're going to want to try to control each other's head, each other's hands, or get inside that inside space. And we're going to defend those things. The defense of all those is another video. There's a lot to that. It's actually what today's class was about, but you're just going to see Brad and I at a very chill pace, hand fighting, trying to have inside space. All right, we'll turn this way so the camera can see. Yep. I don't let him touch my head up. He doesn't like me controlling his arm. Yep, I go 2-on-1 here. He's going to strip that grip, or yep. All right, we try to get each other's head. He doesn't let me. See, it's not that competitive. Yeah, now let's say Brad gets my inside space. He starts to go for a body lock. I'm going to keep him from connecting all the way through my hips. I took his inside space. He knows that's bad. It's just this constant dance. And there are techniques. We're employing specific techniques that, again, are part of another video, another lesson. See, but Brad knows he frees his hips because he knows that if I get his hips, he's going to end up on the ground. Time. That's kind of how that looks when we both know what the objectives, and we know how to defend those things. You can create specific drills, like sometimes it's just about touching the head. So for 15 seconds, we'll just try to get each other's head. So we're not really worried about all that inside space. We're just trying to touch each other's head. And even if Brad gets my head, I can disconnect him. I get his head, he disconnects me, right? So you can limit the scope to just one objective. Ideally, you can open up the drill to all objectives, but it's really cool to isolate certain things. Now we're just gonna try to control each other's hands, okay? Yep, so now it's a little more just literally a hand fight, right? And we're just here. See, we're not letting each other get in the angle. I get a 2-on-1. He turns that into his own 2-on-1. Turn it into my own 2-on-1. I'm trying to advance that. Go ahead. Yep, it's just a hand fight, right? So that's what these drills can look like. And then you combine them, and now we're doing what we were doing the first time, which is all of it. Then you can add and say, hey, if a person starts to gain an advantage, let them get that advantage and escape before the takedown happens. You can let it play out to where you actually do the takedown, and then you work on how to get up effectively. And then pretty soon, you have all these skills that you can just mesh into one kind of flowy drill that never stops. It's really cool. Then on top of that, it's like takedown, and now do jujitsu on the ground. Try not to let me get up. And it just expands from there. And we've done lots of that together. So that's the lesson today. What are the objectives of standing jujitsu, standing grappling, specifically hand fighting? Again, to reiterate, head control, wrist or hand control, and dominating inside space. Cool, thanks.